right, so good to be with you guys today. I'm really excited to get to explore a different area of New York. I've been to New York a bunch of times, but usually it's just down in the city, so fun to see your guys' beautiful campus here and get to share with you guys a little bit about my story. So as you guys saw, just to start off, I love to start this question. How many of you guys hate to run? Yeah, all right, cool. So that's I would have raised my hand when I first got into the sport 13 years ago. Not 13 years ago, 25 years ago. Makes me feel really old. But I hated to run. I wanted to play baseball, basketball, and football. But the problem was I was 5 foot tall and 100 pounds going into high school. So how many of you guys know that's not the ideal frame for a football player? When I was out on the football field, I felt like I had a giant X painted on me that was like, hit me here. So I'd stand on the sideline and just like put my head down and be like, don't put me in, don't put me in. I was that kid. But then one day I felt like God gave me a vision to try and run around the lake in my hometown. I grew up in Big Bear Lake in Southern California. So I remember I was going down to a basketball game, 8th grade, and just looking out over the lake, and it's 15 miles around the lake. Beautiful Southern California mountain town. And I wouldn't say up until that point in my life, like I'd always been kind of a Christian and my faith, spirituality was important to me, but I wouldn't say I necessarily felt like I was having experiences in the spiritual space until that moment. And I felt like God was just kind of like planting a little seed of desire inside me to try and run around the lake. And which was crazy because usually your first run that you go on should not be 15 miles, especially 7,000 feet altitude. So as you can imagine, when I went out and actually did this run with my dad the following Saturday, it was like pain fest, you know? Like I had to stop a bunch of times. I had to ice my legs in the frigid waters in Big Bear and barely made it around. I came back and I just collapsed on the couch. And, anyone who was looking in at that situation, you see this like 13-year-old kid just completely depleted, completely out of it. You'd have thought, man, this kid's never going to run again. Like he just totally shot himself in the foot. But it's actually quite the opposite. And again, like I felt like I was kind of having another kind of spiritual experience where I felt like God was telling me, like he gave me a gift to run with the best guys in the world, but he gave me that gift so I could help and love other people. And so that was really kind of the launching point and the moment that I really fell I fell in love with running and into the sport, and like the trajectory of my life completely changed from being into football, baseball, and basketball to like being fully just devoted and focused on running. So I'm just trying to give you guys a little bit of background so when we get to the point of me talking about my decision to have God as my coach, you guys have a little bit of context to put it into. So I ran all 4 years in high school, had good success, wanted to break 4 minutes as a high school miler, didn't quite get there, ran 4:02, so I was all bummed out afterwards, which is funny to look back on that now and be like, you weren't that far off. Why are you so bummed out? It's funny how when you get removed from your problems, they don't seem as big, you know? So ran 4:02 in high school, went to Stanford University and ran all 4 years at Stanford, and had my ups and downs there, which if you guys want to hear more about that, I'm gonna speak a little bit more about that tonight. And then ran professionally, signed with ASICS coming out of college. You guys saw pictures, that was Mammoth Lakes with the big old mountains in the background. So trained up in Mammoth Lakes, California. All these are like high altitude training locations. I'm currently living in Flagstaff, Arizona. So I don't know if you guys follow running at all, but it's very advantageous to be training at 7,000 feet altitude or higher. So that's why we're in Flagstaff, or Mammoth is 8,000 feet. We've trained in Ethiopia at 9,000 feet, Kenya, 7,000 feet. We've trained all over the world at different high altitude training locations. So anyways, we were training in Mammoth Lakes, California. Everything was going great. My career was taking off. I was moving up in distance, going from a 5K runner collegiately to moving up to the marathon distance at a very young age. I was 23 at the time, which is very young. Usually people run track like their whole track career until they're like 30, and then they go up to the marathon. So it's kind of unorthodox to move to the marathon at such a young age, but I really felt like the longer I went, the better I was. And I was starting to be able to identify how I felt like God made me and what he created me to do and where my talents lied. So I was moving up in distance, and my first half marathon was actually the Houston half marathon, and I set the American record in that race and ran 59:43. And that was all, I was training on this track club in Mammoth. And so, life is going great. I made my first Olympic team, Beijing, set an Olympic trials course record here in Central Park in New York City, ran 2:09:02, making my first team. So again, everything is great. Everything's peachy, right? Like life is good. The best marathoner in America, and I'm continuing to improve. But I was feeling like this deep discontent down inside me because I was so comfortable. And that's one of the things that like people who are runners can understand. What's so fun about running is, number one, like it's not fun to start running. Running is like a secret club. It's the least fun when you're first starting. And I can speak to that personally right now. As Corey mentioned, I stopped running completely for 4 years, got into weightlifting, put on like 40 pounds, and then tried to get back into running. And this was 2 months ago. I was in St. Moritz, Switzerland, and I was running and just dying. My wife's just doing an easy run, like her pre-race run should be super easy, super chill. And I'm like, and I feel like every time I hit the ground's like shaking, and I finish these runs, I'm like, that sucked. Like, that was not fun at all, So running is not fun at the beginning, but it gets more and more fun the fitter you get. So now, like, I'm already in a much different position, as Corey's talking about my workout today. That's just the kind of growth you can see with consistency over time. So if you do hate to run, there is hope for you. It's not going to be fun early on, but there's something about the discomfort of running that's like really addicting. Because I don't know about you guys. Do you guys ever feel uncomfortable with your comfortableness? If that makes sense. Like, that's how I was. Like, I had everything. Like, I wasn't lacking in finances. I was training in one of the most beautiful locations in California. I was the best in my profession in the United States that I was doing. I have a beautiful wife. I have 2 miniature Siberian Huskies that are just amazing dogs. Like, everything is perfect, And there was something about that level of comfortableness that was like deep down inside, like really bothering me. And it's kind of like a growing thing of this, like, I'm missing something. Like, I'm missing resistance. Like, there's no resistance in my life. Like, everything is just going perfectly. And it sounds like that should be the ideal world that we all live in, right? But for me, it wasn't. Like, it was a very disturbing place for me to be. And I found myself starting to like take a toll on me emotionally and like starting to get more like depressive over the littlest little things that set me off. And I'm like, what's going on inside of me? And as I mentioned, like my faith had always been a big part of me. And, I'm watching and interacting with other like Christians in other parts of the world and just seeing like God move and do amazing things, God providing for people to eat their meal that day they otherwise wouldn't get. Like, just seeing the desperation for God in other places of the country where they didn't have everything served to them on a golden platter was like really inspiring to me. I was like, man, like I just wanted that kind of desperation for something, like fill in the blank. Like for me, it was for God to show up. Like maybe for you, it's for something else. But I just was really craving that. Like I was like, I have to experience something that I'm just desperate for. And so, made the decision in 2010 that I was going to have God as my coach, that I was going to leave my team, that I love my team, I love my coach. There was issues, as there are on every team, or anytime any group gets together and works on a project together, there's always like little tensions here and there, So it wasn't a totally perfect situation, but it was pretty much ideal. And so to walk away from that was a little bit of a scary decision. Not a little bit. It was a very scary decision for me to make. But to be honest, like it was a decision I would have been totally comfortable making if I could have done it just in isolation without anyone else knowing about it, But the problem being the fastest marathoner in America is that when you make a decision like that, like people are going to write about it. It's going to get talked about. So it became a very public decision, even though it's a deeply personal decision that I was making. So it was a really interesting time period from the time I went from being on a pro team to being coached by God. And as you can imagine, I had all kinds of expectations of what that would look like to be coached by God. And I was expecting to like have these dreams in the night and like have like training downloaded on my computer in the morning, like the perfect workouts for me to do, and it's gonna be like way different than what everyone else is doing. It's like this secret thing that it's like me and God are in on it and no one else knows about it, you know? And so, you know, I had all these kind of like expectations of what it was gonna look like to be coached by God. And I was shocked like right off the bat, you know? In my faith in Christianity, a lot of what is talked about is like what's going on inside of you is more important than what's going on outside of you. And so God made that very clear to me from the very beginning. One of the first things I felt like God was telling me, and by the way, I never got a training plan downloaded on my computer on a piece of paper or any dreams about running at all. So that was not included in the program, apparently. But one of the first things I felt like God told me is it's more important how you do what you do than what you actually do. So it's more important how I do my workouts, the heart I do it with, the attitude I have going into it, how I hold myself and conduct myself, my thoughts, my inner life. Like that is more important than the nuts and the bolts of like you're going to do 6 times 400 and then 5 by a K and then 2 by a mile with 30 seconds rest in between. Like the actual workout is far less important than what I bring on the inside to this workout. Just to give you guys a little bit of example of what I'm talking about, very standard kind of running workout for someone who's trying to be a miler is 10 by 400 with 60 seconds rest. You guys have a track here, right? You guys ever go do repeats on the track? No. All right. Well, you should try this one out after lunch. After those enchiladas will be perfect fuel for it. But so this would be like a typical workout. There'd be a very grueling, very hard workout. And usually I do this workout trying to prove my fitness to myself. So I'm like, whatever I can average for each 400-meter repeat for the workout is usually what I can average for a mile race. So like, I'm like really trying to prove my fitness to myself or prove my fitness to my coach. So like what's going on inside of me is this whole thing of like, I gotta bring it. I gotta prove that I'm good enough. Whereas when I look at my faith and the things that I learn in the Bible, when I read the Bible, I learn more about like how we need to operate from a place of security and a place of like, I am enough, and then just let that come out. Rather, you see the different, one is trying to force something to happen. The other one is like, I'm just gonna let out what's already inside me. So these were the kind of like deep changes that were happening in me as I was training with God as my coach. Some of the other things that God taught me, I'm gonna get to the results of like how did this actually go, this experiment, because I'm sure that's a big part of what you guys are wondering in the back of your mind. But another big thing that God taught me was just like operating from rest, you know? Like we look at the creation story that's in the Bible and God resting on the 7th day. And I was like, I don't know about you guys, but like I have that mentality of like the harder I work, the more I'm gonna get out of this, and just work, always like harder. And God was kind of like telling me, no, like actually you need to work from rest. Like don't work super hard. Wait till you're really depleted, super fatigued, and you're like you have nothing left to do but rest. Like that's your only option left because you're so like you're just flat on your back, you know. But rather like function from rest, like build rest into your program. So I started taking 1 day off a week, which to me was like huge. It was like, oh man, I'm gonna take a day off. Like it would like rattle me to even think about taking a day off, you know? Just 'cause I like to push so much. And so I started taking a day off, and then I also started putting more space between my workouts and just building rest as a part of my program to be proactive, to get out in front of my fatigue. And I think that's something that, you know, hopefully you guys can take away from this talk as well. Like, in our day and age, like always on our phones, our devices, always working, like always just going. I don't know about you guys, but even myself, like I have this battle to this day, even though I'm retired, of like just go. And I'm learning like, no, I actually, like if I just do that, I'm gonna burn out at some point, and then I'm gonna have to take a huge break. It's like, how do I protect myself? How do I protect my body? How do I be good to my body so that my body can perform the way I want it to perform? And I found that through this experiment with God as my coach, the way to do that is to build rest into your program. Like you gotta get out in front of it. Like we talk about in running with like nutrition, with sleeping, with what you drink, you got to get out in front of it. You got to drink before you're thirsty. You got to eat before you're hungry. You got to sleep as much as you can, even if you don't feel like you need it. Like, that's how you get fast at running. But I think the same is true for us, as like trying to function at a high level in our professions, is like you got to get out in front of your fatigue. Otherwise, we get to this point to where we have no option but to rest, and we get super burned out, or at least that's been my experience. So rest was like another huge thing that I felt like God was speaking to me about, that was very difficult. It took a lot of trust. It took a lot more confidence for me to rest than to train really hard. Like, anyone can train really hard. Like, it doesn't take a lot of confidence to train hard, because every time you go out and train hard, like, you're building that confidence, being like, look what I'm doing, look what I'm doing. You're kind of proving it to yourself. But to rest, it takes like all this confidence that like, no, actually, like, I'm getting better in rest. So like, now that I coach, I tell people like the most performance enhancing thing you can do is sleep. Like, if your training is perfectly dialed in, your nutrition is perfectly dialed in, but you're getting 4 hours of sleep a night, like, it's not going to work. Like, you got to have the whole package, And so God just really hit me with this idea of like function from rest. Another thing that was different than what I was expecting when I decided to have God as my coach is I was expecting it to become like this running monk, like maybe like grow a beard out like to here and super long hair, be living out in the forest by myself, like I'm gonna be like that, But it was actually like totally the opposite. So I was already on a team, and then I left my team. My wife and I left our team, but God like immediately surrounded me with like a whole community to be a part of my journey with me, whether it's nutritionists, sports doctors, massage therapists, other people that I'd get advice from on training. I had a friend who you guys saw in the video, he was biking with me. He'd bike with me for all my workouts and give me fluids. Like, God just surrounded me with community, and that was really eye-opening to me, because I don't know why, I just always had this image, like, to be close to God, you just had to go isolate yourself, And I found that like it was actually totally the opposite. It was like I encountered God through each one of those people, through that community. And then I'd say the last thing I want to talk about in terms of what he showed me before I get into like the actual results that happened with God as my coach, was just that he changed my definition of what winning means. Like, I had been always been told and always thought of winning as you finish first in the race, you win the Olympic gold medal. That was always like my definition of success. And God just totally changed that for me. And it actually happened, I'm kind of fast forwarding a little bit in my story here, and I'll, like I said, talk about my results. But in the London Olympics in 2012, I had God as my coach. And I remember doing interviews on like CNN and all these big news broadcasts, and they were all talking about this like weird thing of having God as my coach. And they're like, if you win this, like everyone's going to want to know about your coach, And I was like, well, thanks for putting a whole bunch of pressure on me. But, I hope that people want to know about my coach, regardless of how I do. But I remember running in the London Olympics, and I had never dropped out of a race in my entire life. I'd been running since the time I was 13. I believe I was 30-ish, around 30 at the time of the London Olympics. And I remember being in the race, and I was having this problem in my upper hamstring, and it was just getting tighter and tighter throughout the race, And I was trying to decide what to do, because I was starting to have to limp, and it was early on in the race. It was like 6 miles into it. And sometimes in the marathon, you're just trying to weather the storm, right? You're just like, this is going to pass, just like get to the next mile. And sometimes it does pass, like weird phantom pains go away, and you're able to work through it. But this one was just clamping down harder and harder and harder on me. And so you start having these thoughts about like images you've seen of the Olympic Games of like people finishing the marathon in like Corey's time, running like 6 hours. You're not alone. And it's very inspiring to watch. Like, everyone's going crazy as they're coming in, But you're like, is that going to be me today, And I don't know if I can do what Corey did. So, these are the kind of things, this is the debate that's going on in my head as I'm running. And I felt like at that time, like God was like, listen, like you've already won. Like knowing me is the definition of success. And like, if you know me, you can't beat, not a gold medal is not going to trump that. And so live to fight another battle another day. And that gave me the grace that I needed to be good to myself, be good to my body, and step off the race course. And that was a super hard, like, talk about surreal experience. That was the most surreal experience of my life. Having never dropped out of a race, even like PE mile runs, you know, to being in the Olympic Games. Like, you can't even find a place to drop out. There's like 10 people deep on both sides of the course, and you're running down the middle of them. And I remember I stopped and started walking. I almost started running again just because it felt so wrong, you know, and then just walked off the course, and immediately you have all these cameras in your face, and you're supposed to like give a articulate interview in that kind of mood, which is extremely challenging, as you can imagine. You just want to like curl up in a ball and be by yourself. So it was a really, you know, difficult decision, but having that definition of success changed me on the inside and allowed me to make the right decision for that moment. So real quick, let's get into the results, then we can do some question and answer if you guys want. So my first race with God as my coach was the 2011 Boston Marathon, and that was a really cool experience because I'd run Boston 2 years prior to that, and Boston, for you guys who don't know, aren't familiar with the marathon there, it's a one-way course. So you start in Hopkinton, you finish in the city. So every once in a while, I talked to Bill Rogers. He's won the race like 4 times. He's like, every once in a while, you get this wicked tailwind. You can run super fast. And I had a day like that. Like, I was standing on the starting line, and I'm looking at the American flag, and it is literally just like blowing the exact direction we're running. So it was the coolest experience because I literally felt like, you know, like oftentimes in the Bible, like God is like thought of as being like the wind, you know, you can't see it, but you can feel it and experience it. And literally, like, it was like God was like pushing us the entire way. And that day I was 4th in the Boston Marathon, and it's been running for over 123 years or something. And I'm the 4th fastest person to ever run that course. And yet I was 4th place that day. So, but it didn't even matter to me. I was just so stoked to have this experience and this encounter with God, and literally feeling like he was pushing all of us along in that race was just amazing. So, 204, that was my first marathon with God as my coach. So we got off on the right foot. That was good. And then ran Chicago, also had a good race in Chicago. Not quite as good as I was hoping, but still ran like 208, which is one of the fastest times ever by an American. And then qualified for the 2012 Olympic team at the Olympic trials in Houston in 2012, also with God as my coach. But what happened was, as I was training for that Olympic trials race, I developed plantar fasciitis. It's like right in the bottom of your heel. Anyone ever had plantar fasciitis in here? It's the worst. It's no fun. Like, you wake up in the morning, first step, you're just like, feel like someone's stabbing you in your heel. So I got that and had no choice but to just run through it. I got it a month before the Olympic trials. So I was popping ibuprofen, a lot of ibuprofen during that time, and just trying to get through my runs, you know, because literally every time my foot contacted the ground, it's like being stabbed in the heel. It's terrible. So that was going on, and that was going on in the Olympic trials race, but I was able to kind of get through it and qualify for the Olympics. But really, that was kind of the beginning of the end for me as an athlete. I developed that injury, and then I really had no choice but to run through it. But the problem is that sometimes when we get one injury, then we just make this very slight compensation with our stride. And so we just vary our stride just a little bit, and then we get hurt on the other side. So I hurt this heel in the Olympic trials, and then I hurt this hamstring in the Olympic Games, and I was training for the New York City Marathon, I tore this quad. Then I was training for Boston, I tore this quad. And I was training for New York City Marathon, I got a stress reaction on this side of my SI joint. And it was just this ridiculous, I mean, this is over years and years of time, you know, but it's just one injury after another injury after another injury. And so, you know, I would say it'd be easy for an onlooker to look at that time period and be like, God's not doing a very good job for you here. Like, you're getting injured like over and over again. And that's a valid point. Like, if you're looking strictly at results, like, I can't argue with that. Like, I wasn't even making it to the starting line of these races. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, like, really, like, what was most powerful about having God as my coach is what was happening on the inside of me. And for me, like, running had always been my thing, you know, it'd been my profession, my passion, my gift, like what I was going after. And so I was terrified of the day when I was going to hang up my shoes and I was going to run my last race. I was like, what am I going to do with myself? Like that rug is just totally pulled out from under me. And like you hear all these stories of like athletes retiring from their sport, going into depression, getting into drugs, like really bad things happening. And I could totally understand how that could happen. And I was worried like that was going to be me. So I'm having all these injuries and just getting worse and worse and worse over this 4-year time period from 2012 to 2016. But the whole time, I'd never felt so close to God and could feel like God just encouraging me through all of those. It doesn't mean like I didn't have down days, down moments. Like if you watch the film 41st Day, you'll see a whole bunch of them. Like I had a lot of rough moments. But I'd say that like God and having His perspective, being able to see myself how He sees me, enabled me to navigate the trickiest season of my life and ultimately retiring. And if I didn't have God as my coach, if I had a coach who was like, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you performing? Like, if they're looking at it as the world's looking at it, like, I don't know if I could have handled that mentally, emotionally. I don't know what I would have done, So, that might be a convenient spiritual way to look at in a series of events that was not very fun to go through, but that really was kind of like what was happening on the inside of me. So ultimately ended up retiring 2016 before the Olympic trials, but still coaching, which is funny because I had God as my coach and now I'm a coach. I am God. No, but like I really did learn from this experience, like how important it is to have someone who's looking out over you and who is like seeing things from a bird's eye view, because it's very difficult to navigate your own situation when you're the one in the middle of it and you're the one in the fight. You need someone up above to be like, hey, look out for this and this. This is what I'm seeing. Like, don't lose sight of the big picture here. So now I'm kind of that guy with my wife who's running professionally, and her career is just taken off since I retired. Maybe like it's not possible for couples to both be doing well at the same time in our sport or something, but she's like tearing it up. And we're the same age. I just turned 37. She's 36. And she's ran 2:22 at the Berlin Marathon, personal best. And she's the fastest marathoner in the U.S. last year. So has a very good chance of making the team in Atlanta in 2020. So, or 2020. So we're super excited about that. I'm actually going from here back to Flagstaff and then back to Atlanta to get on the course and preview it. And so I'm kind of taking all these things I feel like God taught me in that season, and really all the things that I learned from all my great coaches that I had coming up in the sport, because I had a ton of amazing coaches, some of the best in the world. So I'm taking all those things and now trying to apply those to my athletes that I'm coaching, and just loving still continuing to be on the journey. Maybe I'm not out there on the roads, but as Corey's talking about, I'm hoping to get back in shape to be able to run with my wife, which it's unfortunate that she's like a 2:22 marathoner, because that means I have to take it seriously. You can't just be a recreational runner when you're married to a 2:22 marathoner. So yeah, that's my story, guys. Thanks for having me, and we can open up question and answer.